In the epic saga of the Crusades, amid the clash of steel and the rumble of war drums, some figures stand out like beacons of their time. Some known for their piety and commitment to the sacred cause, others for their cunning and tactical brilliance. But few cast shadows as long and chilling as Raynald of Châtillon, a name that echoes through history as a symbol of brutality and unbridled ambition. Born in the second decade of the 12th century in France, Raynald hailed from a noble family, but they were far from the hallowed halls of high aristocracy. His origins were humble enough, but his dreams knew no bounds. From an early age, he harbored a fervent desire to carve his name in the annals of history, to become a legendary figure whose deeds would be sung about in bards' halls for generations to come. And where better a place to do so than the Holy Land, a region steeped in biblical significance and drenched in the blood of two warring factions, the Crusaders and the Muslims. When Raynald set out on his journey to the east, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, also known as Outremer, was anything but tranquil. It was a powder keg of external wars and internal power struggles. In the north, the Crusader states of Edessa, Antioch, and Tripoli were constantly wary of threats from the powerful Muslim princes of Zengid and the Normans of Byzantium. In the south, the Kingdom of Jerusalem itself was engaged in a bitter rivalry with the Ayyubids of Egypt. Into this maelstrom of conflict stepped Raynald, eager to make a name for himself. His opportunity came sooner than expected. At the time, Queen Melisende of Jerusalem was ruling as regent for her young son Baldwin III. The kingdom was technically under a regency, but in reality, Melisende held absolute power. She was a shrewd leader, but her son's accession to adulthood loomed large, threatening her iron-fisted control. Raynald, seeing an opportunity, courted the queen's favor, and she took notice. Not only was he handsome and charismatic, but he also possessed an undeniable charm that won over many in the kingdom. Raynald had inherited his father's good looks, tall stature, and piercing blue eyes, features that were striking against the backdrop of the Levant. His manners were impeccable too, reflecting a deep understanding of the courtly etiquette that was so important in medieval politics. These qualities, combined with his audacious spirit, made him an appealing suitor for the queen, especially since he had designs on the throne that did not include her son. But before we delve deeper into the murky world of deceit and ambition, let's take a closer look at the kingdom itself. Melisende was not only drawn to Raynald's dashing appearance, but also to his military prowess and daring spirit. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was a hotbed of intrigue and warfare, and she needed allies who could stand by her side on the battlefield. Raynald fit that bill perfectly. He had honed his combat skills in France and was eager to test them against the forces of Islam, so when the opportunity arose, Melisende wasted no time in securing their union. She betrothed him to her daughter Constance, Princess of Antioch, thus cementing a bond that would unite two of the most influential Crusader states. This marriage, however, was far from a fairy tale. Constance was already married to Raymond, Prince of Antioch, with whom she had a son. The dissolution of that marriage paved the way for Raynald and Constance's union, but it did not come without its complications. Raynald's elevation to the Principality of Antioch brought him immense power and prestige. The Principality was one of the most strategically important Crusader states, serving as a buffer between the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Muslim principalities to the north. For Raynald, it was a dream come true, a platform from which he could launch himself into the history books. However, wielding such power came with its share of challenges. The first major hurdle was overcoming the resentment of his wife's former suitor, Raymond, who still held a grudge over the annulment of their marriage. Raynald, ever the pragmatist, chose to ignore the simmering animosity and focused on consolidating his power. He set about strengthening the defenses of Antioch, preparing for the inevitable clashes with the Muslims. But little did he know that his recklessness would soon lead to a disaster that would shake the very foundations of the Crusader states. Raynald's tenure in Antioch was far from uneventful. While he worked to strengthen the city's defenses and rally its inhabitants, he also engaged in a series of reckless adventures that made him both revered and reviled. One such escapade involved the island of Cyprus. Ruled by the Byzantines, Cyprus was a strategic jewel in the eastern Mediterranean. But Raynald, eyeing the riches of the island, decided to risk it all and launched an invasion. Unfortunately for him, the Byzantine emperor, Manuel Komnenos, was a formidable opponent. Despite Raynald's initial successes, the tide turned and he found himself captured. The terms of his surrender were humiliating. He was forced to don the traditional garments of his sackcloth, along with a wreath of copper coins on his head, symbolizing his defeat and subjugation. Then he was paraded through the streets of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, while the crowd jeered and mocked him. To add insult to injury, he was chained to a pillar in the Hippodrome, a chariot racing stadium, further emphasizing his impotence and isolation. This public humiliation shook the Crusader world. For Raynald, once a celebrated warrior, to be treated this way was a bitter pill to swallow. But it also sent a message to other aspiring conquerors that even the mighty could fall. Yet, despite the crushing blow to his pride and power, Raynald refused to stay defeated for long. Years passed in the prisons of Aleppo before Raynald's story took another dramatic turn. After enduring years of captivity, Raynald managed to escape the clutches of his Muslim captors. But his freedom was short-lived. He was soon recaptured and thrown back into prison, this time in the infamous dungeons of Damascus. The walls of Damascus had witnessed the imprisonment of countless figures throughout history, but none probably had a backstory as dramatic as Raynald's. As the years dragged on, Raynald began to lose hope of ever seeing the light of day again. The weight of his past deeds, the humiliation in Constantinople, the battles lost, and the lives taken began to weigh heavily on his conscience. For the first time, he contemplated the consequences of his actions and the toll they had taken on himself and on others. It was in these dark hours that Raynald's perspective started to shift. The fire of ambition, which once burned so brightly within him, now flickered, threatened to be extinguished by the winds of regret and despair. His release finally came as part of a prisoner exchange orchestrated by the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Though freed, Raynald was a changed man. The once brash, ambitious ruler had been tempered by the fires of adversity, emerging with a new outlook on life and a newfound respect for those he once considered beneath him. Back in Antioch, Raynald did not resume the role of a conquering hero. Instead, he threw himself into diplomacy, working tirelessly to forge alliances and secure peace treaties with neighboring principalities. His years in captivity had taught him the futility of endless warfare and the value of unity in the face of adversity. It was during this time that he developed a deep admiration for the people he had once sought to conquer. He learned their customs, their traditions, and their language, breaking down the barriers that had once divided them. His transformation was remarkable, but it was not universally celebrated. Some in Antioch saw his newfound humility as a sign of weakness, a betrayal of their shared heritage. They whispered that he had been corrupted by his Muslim captors and had forsaken the Christian values that had brought them to the Holy Land. However, Raynald pressed on, undeterred by the whispers and rumors. He continued to reach out to the Muslim leaders, engaging in trade and cultural exchanges that defied the expectations of his contemporaries. He organized joint crusades with the Muslim rulers against their common enemies, proving that cooperation, not conquest, was the key to survival in the volatile world of the Crusades. Meanwhile, the rest of the Crusader East was in turmoil. The death of Sibylla, Queen of Jerusalem, led to a succession crisis that tore the kingdom apart. Raynald, ever the opportunist, saw his chance to seize power and influence. He abandoned Antioch and returned to Jerusalem, aligning himself with Queen Isabella I, who was locked in a power struggle with her brother, King Baldwin IV. As the struggle for the throne intensified, so did the raids and attacks from the Muslim forces. Raynald, now in his late 60s, was seen as a liability rather than an asset. He retreated to the fortress of Kerak in southern Jordan, hoping to hold out until reinforcements arrived. But the siege was long and brutal, and Kerak was eventually captured. Raynald, along with his son, was taken prisoner by Saladin and sent to the fortress of Safed. From here, Raynald was transferred to Damascus, where he spent his last days. His health was failing and his spirit was broken. He had once been a formidable warrior, a ruthless conqueror, but now he was just a shadow of his former self, haunted by the ghosts of his past. As his end neared, he was visited by a Muslim preacher who offered him the chance to convert to Islam. Raynald, weary and disillusioned, is said to have accepted the offer. According to Muslim sources, he even converted some of his family members before his death. On December 6, 1187, Raynald of Châtillon died in Damascus. The circumstances surrounding his death are unclear, but according to legend, he was killed by Saladin's son, Al-Adil, after mistreating him while he was a prisoner. Whatever the truth may be, Raynald's death marked the end of an era in the Crusades. He was a complex and enigmatic figure, a man who straddled two worlds, yet belonged to neither. His story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, redemption is possible. And it's a testament to the human spirit's capacity for change and growth. Raynald of Châtillon may have ended his life as a Muslim, but his legacy will forever be tied to the Crusades and the tumultuous history of the Levant. Whether remembered as a villain or a tragic hero, his story continues to captivate and inspire us centuries later. As we all know, the Crusades are a highly contentious subject. One of the greatest issues is the notion that all Crusaders were fanatical religious zealots who went around raping, pillaging, and murdering everyone who wasn't Christian. Now, while this portrayal may be somewhat exaggerated, it does have some basis in reality. The fact is there were many Crusaders who engaged in extreme acts of violence against Muslims, Jews, and even fellow Christians. So today we are going to talk about one Crusader who personified the worst aspects of his order, the reckless and brutal Raynald of Châtillon. Our story begins in 1153 when a young French mercenary named Raynald of Châtillon seized the county of Edessa in northern Mesopotamia. It was a small but vital Crusader state that served as a bulwark against the expanding power of the Zengid dynasty to the east. But Raynald didn't care about politics or diplomacy. He wanted power, wealth, and glory. And he believed that the best way to get them was through conquest and plunder. Unfortunately for him, though, he lived in a time when both of those things were pretty hard to come by. That is, unless you were willing to do something outrageous. In 1156, while still struggling to secure his own position in Edessa, Raynald decided to invade the island of Cyprus. Now, you may be thinking, why on earth would he do such a thing? I mean, Cyprus was a prosperous Byzantine island, but it was also strategically important to the Crusaders because it was the key to controlling the eastern Mediterranean. To make matters worse, it was ruled by Emperor Manuel Komnenos, a staunch ally of the Crusader states and one of the most powerful emperors in Byzantine history. Clearly, then, invading Cyprus was a risky move, but Raynald wasn't concerned with risk. He wanted treasure, and he knew that the wealthy Byzantines would have plenty of it. And so he assembled a small fleet, recruited some mercenaries, and set sail for the island. What happened next can only be described as a disaster. As soon as his fleet arrived, Raynald launched an attack on the coastal city of Limassol, but he was beaten back by the defenders. He tried again at Paphos, but failed again. In desperation, he landed his troops inland and marched on the capital, Nicosia, but there he was captured by Manuel's brother, Andronikos Komnenos, and thrown into prison. Raynald had gambled and lost, and now he was paying the price. To his credit, though, he was able to escape from prison and flee to Antioch, where he married Constance, Princess of Antioch, giving him access to her vast fortune. Her father, King Raymond, was initially furious with Raynald, whom he blamed for inciting Manuel to invade the county, but he eventually came around to the idea of having such a powerful ally as Châtillon. For his part, Raynald seemed eager to atone for his past mistakes and prove himself to be a loyal vassal. He joined the crusade against the Zengids and fought bravely against Nur ad-Din Zengi's forces, until he was captured in 1160 and imprisoned in Aleppo for 8 long years. Finally, in 1172, he was able to escape and return to Antioch, where he was welcomed as a hero. But by this time, the political situation in the Crusader states had changed dramatically. Nur al-Din's successor, Saladin, had taken control of Jerusalem and was rapidly expanding his empire. Furthermore, the death of Constans meant that Raynald was no longer allied to the royal family of Antioch. As a result, he found himself in a precarious position, caught between the rising power of Saladin and the waning influence of Antioch. So what did he do? You guessed it, he got married again. This time he wed Stephanie, Lady of Altri-Jordan, a small but strategically important fortress on the border between Christian and Muslim-controlled territory. With his new wife came control of Carrick, which made Raynald one of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom. But instead of using his power to strengthen the defenses of the Crusader states or build alliances with the other nobles, he launched a campaign of terror against the Muslims. His preferred method was to organize raids on the trade caravans that traveled between Egypt and Mesopotamia. These raids were not only profitable, but they were also a thorn in the side of Saladin, who desperately needed the resources of his empire to resist the growing threat posed by the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem. To make matters worse, Raynald had no qualms about breaking the truce between Saladin and the Crusader kingdom. In fact, he reveled in it. He delighted in the slaughter of Muslims and the pillage of their cities. He was a true psychopath. One of his most audacious raids took place in 1177, when he led a group of knights on a pilgrimage to the tomb of St. James in Spain. On the way, they stopped in France to recruit some soldiers, and then set sail for the Holy Land. There, they launched a surprise attack on a Muslim caravan and slaughtered hundreds of merchants. Then they headed north to Tyre, where they planned to plunder the Muslim quarter, but they were driven back by the defenders. Undeterred, they sailed to Acre and laid siege to the city, but again, they were forced to retreat. Finally, they reached Jaffa, where they plundered the town and massacred the inhabitants. It was clear that Raynald was not content with simply holding his own. He wanted more land, more power, more treasure. But how could he possibly hope to achieve that goal when he was surrounded by enemies? The answer, as always, was violence. In 1180, Raynald had hatched a plan to invade Egypt and overthrow Saladin. He assembled a small fleet of ships and recruited some soldiers, then set sail for the Egyptian coast. There he launched a series of attacks on the coastal cities, but he was driven back each time. Then he had an epiphany. Why fight Saladin on land when you can invade him on the high seas? Raynald spent 2 years building a fleet of warships and training a crew of sailors. Then in 1182, he set sail for the Red Sea. There he attacked the port of Suez, but was defeated by the defenders. He tried again at Aden, but failed again. In desperation, he landed his troops on the Arabian Peninsula and marched on Mecca, but he was forced to turn back when he learned that Saladin was approaching with an army. However, this humiliating defeat did not deter Raynald. In fact, it only made him more determined than ever to conquer the Muslim world. He returned to the Red Sea and began attacking the ports of Hejaz, the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. His goal was to capture these cities and force the Muslims to pay tribute to the Crusaders. But once again, he was met with fierce resistance. Saladin was furious with Raynald and his allies, the Ayyubids and the Mervinids, prepared for war. They assembled a massive army and marched on the Crusader states. By this time, Raynald was a dangerous enemy. He had proven himself to be a skilled military leader and a ruthless fighter. He was also incredibly wealthy, which meant that he could afford to hire mercenaries and equip them with the latest weapons. Furthermore, he had gained the support of several powerful nobles, including Hugh of St. Omer, the constable of Jerusalem. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the Crusaders were able to hold off the Muslims for several months. However, in 1187, Raynald made a fatal mistake. He attacked a large trade caravan carrying supplies to the besieged city of Tiberias. This was a major blunder. Not only did he violate the truce with Saladin, but he also provoked the Muslims into action. Saladin saw Raynald's attack as a pretext for war. He rallied his forces and marched on the Crusader kingdom. Within days, he had captured Jerusalem and Raynald's fortress at Carrick. Raynald himself was forced to flee to the mountains near Damascus. There he lived like a fugitive for the next 2 years, waging hit-and-run attacks on the Muslims. But it was only a matter of time before he was captured. In 1189, Saladin's brother, Al-Adil, tracked him down and offered him a choice. Either surrender and live out the rest of your life in prison or die fighting. Raynald chose to fight, but he was quickly overwhelmed by Al-Adil's forces. He was captured and brought before Saladin in Damascus. According to legend, Saladin was furious with Raynald for his years of aggression and treachery. He had him stripped, tied up and thrown into a dungeon. The next day, he had him brought before him again and offered him another choice. Convert to Islam and live or die. Raynald chose death. Saladin had him put to death right then and there, his body left to rot in the dungeon. With Raynald out of the picture, Saladin was free to focus on the Crusader states. Within months, he had conquered all of them and established his own kingdom in Jerusalem. So what can we learn from the story of Raynald? What was it that made him so reckless and brutal? One possible explanation is that Raynald was a product of his time. The Crusades were a violent, chaotic period in history, and Raynald was caught up in the frenzy of it all. He was also influenced by the teachings of some of the leading figures in the Crusader movement, such as Bernard of Clairvaux, who preached a message of religious fervor and militant piety. Another explanation is that Raynald was simply a psychopath, someone who derived pleasure from the slaughter of others. If that's the case, then there's not much more to say. He was just a bad guy who got what was coming to him. Whatever the case may be, there's no denying that Raynald of Châtillon was one of the most colorful characters in Crusader history. He was a warrior, a pirate, a noble, a traitor, and ultimately a martyr. Whether you admire him or despise him, one thing is for sure, you won't soon forget him. Thank you for watching. Today, we are going to talk about one of the most iconic villains of the Crusades, Raynald of Châtillon, or as he is known in Arabic sources, Raynald the Accursed. Now, if you have heard about this guy before, it is likely that you have heard of his reputation as a bloodthirsty fanatic who wanted to attack the holy cities of Islam, Mecca and Medina. But did he really want to do that? And was he really as monstrous as the Muslim sources made him out to be? To get to the bottom of this controversial figure, we must examine both Christian and Muslim sources to find out the full truth. So let's jump right into it. Raynald of Châtillon was born around 1168 in the county of Toulouse. He came from a family of lower nobility, and in 1174, his father, a knight of the First Crusade, died in the siege of the city of Aleppo. In 1180, Raynald went on crusade himself with Louis VII, King of France, and distinguished himself at the siege of Acre, where he captured the city's governor. It was here that he got the attention of King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, who needed men to defend his kingdom against the powerful forces of Saladin, the Muslim leader who was gradually taking over the region. So Baldwin asked Louis VII to give him Raynald to serve in his army. Raynald served the kingdom of Jerusalem well and saw much success against the Muslims, which led to him being appointed Constable of Jerusalem, essentially making him the commander of the kingdom's army. During his time as constable, he participated in several major battles against Saladin, including the siege of Darum, where he distinguished himself by personally killing many Muslim knights. However, something happened after this that changed everything. As far as what this event was, there is some debate. But all sources agree that it involved Raynald, a group of Frankish nobles, and the security of the pilgrim road between Jerusalem and Jaffa. See, in medieval Christianity, protecting pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land was very important, and in particular, ensuring the safety of those traveling along the coast was vital since inland routes were often too dangerous to use due to roving bands of Muslim warriors. But while the bulk of the responsibility for protecting coastal pilgrims fell on the local lords along the route, Raynald apparently convinced some of the Frankish nobles to stop providing protection altogether and instead wait near Septimus for pilgrims to pass and then rob them. And so they did. They robbed the pilgrims and killed anyone who resisted. Naturally, the locals weren't too happy about this, and many of the nobles that Raynald had convinced to join him in robbing the pilgrims soon regretted their decision. In 1183, Raynald's brother, a monk named Thomas, traveled to Jerusalem to see King Baldwin to complain about Raynald's actions. But before he could get there, he was killed on the road by Raynald's men. When King Baldwin heard about this, he was furious. Although Raynald was one of his most successful generals, he could not tolerate such lawlessness within his kingdom, and so he brought Raynald to court to try him for his crimes. However, Raynald escaped before he could be punished, and now wandered throughout the kingdom as a traitor and a rebel. He fled to the coast where he assembled a fleet of ships and became a pirate. Not only did he continue to prey on Christian pilgrims, but he also attacked Muslim shipping lanes. All the while, Baldwin and Saladin were trying to make peace between each other. But Raynald refused to participate in any truces and continued his campaign of terror until his death. In 1187, Saladin finally defeated the Kingdom of Jerusalem decisively at the Battle of Hattin. After the battle, he pursued the remnants of the Frankish army, led by King Guy of Lusignan, to the city of Acre. During the siege of Acre, Saladin executed many of the knights that surrendered, including Raynald, whom he had in his sights the whole time. Saladin apparently spared no effort to hunt down Raynald. He had ransacked the tomb of an important Muslim saint and was blamed for the desecration of Muslim graves during the siege of Acre. Raynald was taken to Damascus, where he was beheaded. So what exactly did he do to earn such hatred from both sides? Well, to answer that question, we need to look at both Christian and Muslim sources to get a complete picture. As we have seen, Christian sources tend to paint Raynald in a positive light. He was a brave soldier who fought valiantly against the enemies of Christ. And although he made mistakes, they were often in service of the greater good. For example, in the history of the deeds of Saladin, William of Tyre recounts an incident where Raynald tried to assassinate Saladin while he was praying. According to William of Tyre, Raynald was merely avenging the death of his brother Thomas, who died on the road between Jaffa and Jerusalem, allegedly at the hands of Saladin's men. On the other hand, Muslim sources portray Raynald as nothing more than a bloodthirsty fanatic with no regard for human life or Islamic customs. In fact, Muslim historians accuse him of planning to attack the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, which would be considered the ultimate sacrilege in Islam. It's important to keep in mind that both of these perspectives are highly biased. Christian sources naturally want to make Raynald look good because he was on the side of the Franks, while Muslim sources want to make him look bad because he was on the side of the Muslims. However, that does not mean that one narrative is completely true and the other is completely false. More likely, both of them are partially true. That is to say, Raynald wasn't completely heroic, nor was he completely evil. Rather, he was simply a product of his time and environment. He lived in a world where violence and war were commonplace. And in such a world, it is not surprising that he resorted to desperate measures in order to survive. What's interesting about Raynald is that he was able to hold the title of Constable of Jerusalem, basically the highest military position in the kingdom, despite being a lower noble. It was during his tenure as constable that he gained control of the pilgrim route between Jerusalem and Jaffa and decided to set up an extortion racket with the help of some of the Frankish nobles. We don't know exactly why he did this, but it was probably because he felt threatened by Saladin's growing power. By controlling the pilgrim route, he was able to get money from the pilgrims and also recruit more soldiers to his banner, which he desperately needed to defend himself against Saladin. However, he miscalculated and the Frankish nobles turned on him, forcing him to flee for his life. Now, whether or not he intended to attack Mecca and Medina is unknown. If he really did intend to do that, then that would make him a complete fanatic. However, I think that it was just another ploy to get Saladin to come out of his territory and fight him. You see, according to Muslim sources, Raynald sent letters to Saladin challenging him to single combat. And it was only after Saladin ignored these letters that Raynald decided to attack him. So I believe that attacking Mecca and Medina was just a rumor spread by Muslim sources to discredit him and make him look like a fanatic. After Raynald was forced to flee Jerusalem, he became a pirate, preying on both Christians and Muslims alike. To the Muslims, this made him nothing less than a villain. But to the Christians, it made him a folk hero of sorts. After his death, legends about his bravery and daring deeds circulated throughout Europe, and he became a symbol of resistance against Muslim domination. In conclusion, Raynald was neither a Christian hero nor a Muslim villain. Rather, he was a complex man who acted in accordance with the times in which he lived. He was a product of the Crusades, a man who fought for the kingdom of Jerusalem with unwavering determination, yet who also resorted to desperate measures when faced with overwhelming odds. His story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white, that even the most reviled figures can be viewed through multiple lenses. Understanding the nuances of Raynald's character allows us to gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of the Crusades and the individuals who shaped them. Thank you all for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please hit that thumbs up button below. Consider subscribing and joining our community. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who help to support the channel. You all help to ensure that this content can be made for free and that keeps history alive. I'll catch you all next time. Raynald of Châtillon, a name synonymous with reckless abandon during the medieval Crusades. The French royal was far from your typical ruler. Renowned for his insatiable appetite for plunder and an iron-fisted approach to governance, he left an indelible mark on the turbulent history of the Crusades. While many Crusader leaders often opted for diplomacy or at least a facade of peace with their Muslim counterparts, Raynald stood apart, adopting a bellicose approach that enraged the Muslim world. He ceaselessly raided Muslim trade caravans and even dared to threaten attacks on the holiest of sites in Islam, Mecca and Medina. This incendiary behavior did not go unnoticed, and in particular, it caught the eye of Saladin, the legendary Muslim leader who dreamed of uniting the fragmented Muslim states under his banner and driving the Crusaders back into the sea. In today's episode, we will explore the life and times of this notorious prince and try to answer a pressing question: was Raynald of Châtillon an unwitting pawn in Saladin's grand scheme to unify the Muslim world? Join us as we delve into the annals of history and uncover the intriguing connection between these two iconic figures. Raynald of Châtillon, Seigneur de Carac, was born in 1168 in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Latin kingdom established by European Christians in the Levant region during the Crusades. His father, the aforementioned Amalric I, was the king of Jerusalem from 1162 to 1174. During Amalric's reign, the Crusader states faced constant pressure from Muslim forces, particularly those led by the rising star Saladin. But it was during his brother Baldwin's rule that Raynald truly made a name for himself. In 1174, when Raynald was just 6 years old, Baldwin IV ascended to the throne after their father's death. Under Baldwin's rule, the Crusader kingdom enjoyed a period of stability and prosperity. However, with the young monarch preoccupied with administration, it fell upon Raynald to defend the realm against external threats. As a member of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Raynald technically held an esteemed position and wielded considerable power. But his true calling lay in the realm of action, leading armies into battle and claiming spoils of war. It was a dangerous game he played, but one that paid dividends in a time when military prowess was the ultimate measure of a leader's success. And what better way to make a name for oneself than by vanquishing the enemy and taking their riches? Raynald rose to the occasion, launching relentless attacks on Muslim forces and amassing great wealth in the process. Soon, his reputation as a skilled warrior and cunning tactician spread far and wide, reaching even the ears of Saladin. For his part, Saladin was eager to put an end to the reign of terror inflicted by these Crusader lords. But before we delve deeper into the relationship between Raynald and Saladin, if you find our videos educational and entertaining, please consider supporting us. Your support will help us continue to produce high-quality content. Now let's get back to the story. By 1180, Raynald was well on his way to becoming a formidable force in the region. But his ambition knew no bounds, and he soon set his sights on the lucrative trade caravans passing through Muslim lands. To the devout Muslim world, these caravans carried not just goods, but also pilgrims making their way to Mecca. Raynald saw an opportunity to strike a devastating blow against his enemies and simultaneously enrich himself. And so began a reign of terror as Raynald and his knights pillaged Muslim territory, preying on both trade caravans and unsuspecting pilgrims. He showed no mercy, killing or imprisoning anyone who crossed his path and stealing their possessions without remorse. Raynald's behavior was seen as nothing less than piracy, and it outraged the Muslim world. Even worse, it threatened to destabilize the region and ignite a full-scale war between the Crusaders and Muslims. Saladin watched with growing concern as Raynald's actions pushed the region towards the brink of chaos. He realized that to restore order and protect his people, he would have to take drastic measures. But what exactly were these measures, and how did they involve Raynald? At first glance, Raynald's actions may seem like mere bloodlust and a lust for gold. But some historians argue that there was a method to his madness. Raynald's repeated attacks on Muslim caravans and holy sites were not mere acts of violence, but a deliberate strategy to destabilize the region and prevent the consolidation of power under Saladin's rule. By creating chaos and animosity between the Muslim states, Raynald ensured that Saladin would be forced to spend his resources and divert his attention away from the Crusader states. In effect, Raynald forced Saladin to fight on multiple fronts, weakening his overall military strength and delaying the realization of his grand vision for a united Muslim world. Some historians go even further, suggesting that Raynald played a crucial role in the Battle of Hattin, one of the most decisive battles of the Crusades, which resulted in the fall of Jerusalem to Saladin. By provoking Saladin and drawing his forces into battle, Raynald effectively helped Saladin achieve his strategic goals. For example, Raynald's invasion of the Red Sea in 1182, where he attacked Muslim pilgrims on their way to Mecca, is seen by some as the catalyst that finally pushed Saladin to launch his offensive against the Crusader states. Until that point, Saladin had been hesitant to risk a full-scale war with the Crusaders. But Raynald's audacious attack on one of the holiest sites in Islam left Saladin with no choice but to retaliate. Moreover, Raynald's brutality alienated many of the local Muslim tribes, who turned to Saladin for protection against the marauding Crusaders. This support proved crucial for Saladin as he built his coalition to challenge the Crusader states. However, not all historians agree with this interpretation of events. Some argue that Raynald's actions were nothing more than the result of his own personal ambitions and greed. They point to his history of lawlessness and disregard for the rights of others as evidence that Raynald was driven by self-interest rather than a desire to serve a greater purpose. These historians contend that Raynald's repeated attacks on Muslim caravans and holy sites were not part of a larger plan to weaken Saladin, but rather the product of his own bloodlust and lust for gold. They argue that Raynald's greed ultimately led to his downfall and the destruction of the Crusader kingdom in Jerusalem. But even if Raynald's actions were not part of a deliberate plan to hinder Saladin's rise to power, his behavior still had significant consequences for the course of history. By pushing the region to the brink of chaos and forcing Saladin to take drastic measures, Raynald played a pivotal role in the events that led to the fall of Jerusalem. In the end, it may not matter whether Raynald consciously sought to prevent Saladin from uniting the Muslim world. His legacy will forever be tied to that of Saladin and the fall of the Crusader kingdom in Jerusalem. So was Raynald of Châtillon an unwitting pawn in Saladin's grand scheme to unify the Muslim world? Perhaps. Whether he played a deliberate or unwitting role, Raynald's legacy lives on in the annals of history as a man whose actions, though driven by personal ambition and greed, had profound consequences for the fate of nations. Regardless of his intentions, Raynald's story serves as a reminder of the complexities of the human psyche and the unintended consequences of our actions. As we reflect on his life and times, we are left to wonder about the choices we make and the impact they have on the world around us. After Saladin recaptured Jerusalem in 1187, Raynald fled to the west, living out the remainder of his days in exile. He died in 1192, leaving behind a legacy of fear and loathing among the Muslims and infamy among his fellow Crusaders. His tactics and brutal treatment of Muslims are said to have galvanized Saladin and other Muslim leaders in a way that no other Crusader lord had managed. Despite his martial skills, Raynald's name has become synonymous with recklessness and aggression, overshadowing any positive contributions he might have made during his lifetime. So what do you think? Do you believe that Raynald of Châtillon was an unwitting pawn in Saladin's grand scheme? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe for more historical tales. Until next time, stay curious. This is a history hot tip. Today, we are going to look at what would happen if someone decided to violate the terms of their surrender. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well, but you probably know the story already. You've seen Kingdom of Heaven, don't lie. I know you stayed up late into the night watching Kingdom of Heaven. Let's be honest, we all love a good historical epic, don't we? But today I wanted to talk about the real reasons why Jerusalem fell and how the infamous death of Raynald of Châtillon really was like in the movie. Okay, now let's rewind back to the year 1187. The scene is the Siege of Acre. The year before, Saladin had laid siege to the city, but negotiations had brought the fighting to a standstill and a treaty had allowed the defenders to leave the city with their heads held high. So when they marched out of the city gates, Saladin rode forward to meet them. A truce had been established, but this didn't last long. At the center of the drama was the infamous Raynald of Châtillon, the man who would become known for his defiance and ultimate demise. Now, to truly understand Raynald's character and the events that led to this monumental clash, we need to travel back to his early days. Born around 1168 near Paris, Raynald came from a family of lower nobility. His father, Gerard, had been a knight of the Temple, and his uncle, Hugh, was the constable of France. So from birth, Raynald had been steeped in the culture of knighthood, learning the skills of arms and combat alongside the codes of chivalry and honor. It was this upbringing that would both shape his character and lead him to his destiny. His entry onto the Crusader stage happened unexpectedly and dramatically. In 1179, when Raymond, the former ruler of Antioch, died without a clear heir, the Crusader Council in Antioch chose young Raynald, then only 11 years old, to succeed him. According to popular belief, Raynald received word of his appointment while bathing, and instead of wiping himself with a towel, he famously declared, "I am more accustomed to dipping my bread in blood than in wine." Such stories, though perhaps apocryphal, hint at the kind of leader Raynald would become. And yet, despite these claims of ferocity, there are few records of his military exploits in his early years. In fact, the first major event attributed to Raynald was his controversial invasion of Cyprus in 1178. At the time, Cyprus was ruled by a Frankish nobleman named Amalric, who was also the uncle of Raynald's wife, Constance of Antioch. When Amalric died, his widow and heir, Isabella, appealed to Raynald for help against those who contested her claim. Raynald's response was brutal and decisive. He invaded the island, dethroned Isabella's rivals, and seized control of the northern part of the island. In doing so, he set the stage for future conflicts with the Byzantines over control of Cyprus, showcasing both his ambition and his willingness to engage in warfare. From there, his path takes a dramatic turn. In 1182, while leading a raid into Syria, Raynald and his men were captured and taken to Damascus. Here he faced a decade-long imprisonment, enduring a captivity that shaped his outlook and fueled his thirst for revenge. Notably, it was during this period that Raynald converted to Islam, supposedly renouncing Christianity. However, whether this conversion was genuine or a calculated ruse to gain favor from his Muslim captors remains a matter of debate. What is certain is that Raynald's experience as a prisoner deeply affected him, hardening his resolve and intensifying his desire for retribution upon his release. Around 1192, Raynald returned to the Holy Land, this time under different circumstances. He married Stephanie of Milly, the daughter of a powerful Crusader lord, and gained control of the fortress of Carrick. This marked a shift in his fortunes, transforming him from a captive to a key player in the Crusader politics. And it was here in Carrick that Raynald began to make a name for himself, albeit through controversial means. One of his notable acts was to ally himself with a local chieftain named al-Adil, who commanded a group of dissident Muslim tribes. This alliance aimed to counterbalance Saladin's growing influence, demonstrating Raynald's tendency to form unlikely alliances to further his interests. It was during this time that he began launching deadly raids against Muslim caravans passing through the area. But the problem was that these raids violated truces that had been carefully negotiated by other Crusader leaders, a fact that made him unpopular among the other nobles. In 1186, when Saladin captured several Crusader knights for raiding, he demanded compensation from King Guy of Jerusalem. But the situation escalated when Raynald attacked a Muslim caravan despite a truce between Saladin and King Guy. This wasn't just a breach of the peace accord. It was a personal insult to Saladin, who considered any violation of trust unacceptable. To make matters worse, when summoned to answer for his actions, Raynald defiantly refused to comply. This attitude only fueled the flames of conflict, pushing Saladin closer to war. Saladin saw Raynald's actions as an opportunity to not just punish the rebellious noble, but to address the broader issue of Crusader lawlessness in the region. For years, Saladin had tried to coexist with the Crusaders, even negotiating truces and marriage alliances. But Raynald's repeated provocations pushed him over the edge. With the support of the majority of Muslim factions, Saladin declared jihad against the Crusaders. When news reached Raynald, he urged King Guy to declare open war and march against Saladin, effectively joining the fray. The result was the Battle of Hattin, where Saladin's forces encircled the Crusader army, denying them water and exploiting their disarray. The battle was a catastrophe for the Crusaders. Their army was decimated and King Guy, along with other nobles, was captured. Raynald, playing a key role in persuading the king to engage Saladin, shared in the blame for the disastrous defeat. After the battle, Saladin kept his promise to kill Raynald, executing him personally, emphasizing that Raynald's treachery had been the catalyst for the war. This execution served as a warning to other would-be troublemakers, making it clear that disobedience and insubordination would have severe consequences. While the Battle of Hattin was a decisive moment in the history of the Crusades, it is important to remember that the fall of Jerusalem in 1187 was not solely due to the actions of one man. Multiple factors had been building towards this outcome. There had been a series of earlier sieges, including those of Darum, Jaffa, and Acre, which had weakened the Crusader states and drained their resources. Each siege chipped away at the Crusader resolve, making victory at Hattin even more crucial. But because of Raynald's insistence on total war with the Muslims, they lost the battle. They lost the city. However, Raynald's role in the events leading up to the fall of Jerusalem cannot be understated. His defiance of Saladin and refusal to uphold negotiated truces destabilized an already fragile situation. His aggressive stance left Saladin with little choice but to take drastic action, eventually leading to the downfall of Jerusalem. So what can we learn from Raynald's story? First, it reminds us that individuals, no matter how ambitious, must operate within the limits of strategy and diplomacy. Raynald's personal vendetta against the Muslims blinded him to the bigger picture, alienating potential allies and emboldening their greatest enemy. Secondly, it shows how reputation and perception play a critical role in shaping history. Raynald's image as a fierce warrior was a large part of his appeal and power base. However, this reputation also contributed to his downfall as it led him to take risks that a more measured leader might have avoided. Finally, Raynald's story highlights the importance of understanding your enemy. Had he recognized the strategic brilliance and unifying abilities of Saladin, he might have chosen a different path. But his inability to comprehend his opponent's strengths ultimately led to his demise. As we conclude this episode, let us remember that history is complex and nuanced. While figures like Raynald of Châtillon played significant roles in events like the fall of Jerusalem, they are only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Understanding their motivations, actions, and consequences helps us paint a more complete picture of the past. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep seeking knowledge, and always remember there is more to the story than meets the eye. Raynald de Châtillon, a name that evokes strong reactions, particularly among those who watched Ridley Scott's film Kingdom of Heaven. Portrayed by Liam Neeson, Raynald is depicted as a murderous, intolerant fanatic who justifies his atrocities in the name of God and disregards the pleas for mercy from both Muslims and Christians. In stark contrast, Saladin is shown as a noble, tolerant, and wise leader willing to extend peace deals to the Crusader kingdoms. These contrasting depictions leave viewers questioning whether there was any truth to the historical claims that Raynald single-handedly provoked Saladin to unite the Muslim world against the Crusaders. Before we begin, please support us, it will help us a lot. To answer this question, let's revisit the life of this enigmatic medieval knight, paying attention to the events and decisions that might hold the key to unraveling the mystery behind Raynald's infamous reputation. The origins of Raynald de Châtillon can be traced back to the year 1168 when he embarked on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, driven by religious zeal. According to a letter written by Abbot Samson of the Benedictine monastery at Bury-St. Raynald had already made two pilgrimages to the Holy Land before the Third Crusade. Upon his arrival, the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem entrusted him with the defense of the fortress at Moorish. There, Raynald distinguished himself through his courage, expanding Crusader territory beyond the initial confines of the kingdom. Following his successful stint at Moorish, Raynald was summoned to Antioch by Prince Bohemond III. The Antiochians, needing assistance in their ongoing conflict with Genghis Khan, found themselves caught in the crossfire as the Turks advanced toward the city. When Zenghi's troops approached Antioch in 1175, Prince Bohemond III decided to flee, leaving the city's fate uncertain. In this precarious moment, Raynald stepped in, assuming the mantle of leadership and organizing the city's defenses. Despite being outnumbered, Raynald rallied the troops and successfully repelled the attacks against Antioch. This heroic stand saved the city and solidified Raynald's status as a respected leader. However, in 1183, following Bohemond's demise, Antioch fell under the rule of King Baldwin V of Jerusalem. Baldwin, perhaps driven by jealousy over Reginald's past victories, begrudgingly appointed him to the position of Constable of Antioch. This appointment, laden with responsibilities, involved overseeing the maintenance of castles along the border with Zengid possessions. Although officially serving under King Baldwin, Raynald maintained a certain autonomy in managing his domain. But Raynald's ambitions didn't end there. After the death of Gerard of Rydfort, the ruler of the county of Tripoli, Raynald seized the opportunity to expand his influence. He led a military campaign to conquer the city in 1187, marking a significant step in his rise to power. It was around this time that Raynald earned the moniker Arnott, as recorded in Arabic historical texts. According to historian Stephen Runciman, the name Arnott is thought to be either a translation or a corruption of the name Raynald, commonly used in Arabic texts. The adoption of this new name coincided with Raynald's embrace of Islam after his wife and children died in an earthquake. While stories of Raynald converting to Islam exist, they lack historical verification. Regardless, the transformation in Raynald's life marked a shift in his attitude towards the Muslim world. Raynald's new outlook eventually led him to adopt the title Emir al-Din, meaning Emir of the Faith, reflecting his changed perspective. Raynald's decision to marry a Muslim woman and interact with the local population opened a dialogue between him and Saladin. Initially, their relationship appeared cordial. Saladin sought Raynald's counsel regarding the construction of a hospital, demonstrating a level of trust between them. Raynald, in turn, allowed Saladin to visit Jerusalem during the Christmas season. However, tensions escalated in 1189 when news of King Philip II's siege of Acre reached them. Believing that Saladin intended to hinder his efforts, Raynald preemptively attacked a Muslim caravan carrying provisions to Acre. This marked a turning point in their relationship and foreshadowed the animosity that would define their interactions moving forward. As the Third Crusade commenced, Raynald abandoned his role in Antioch and relocated to Caravans Castle in the south of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Strategically located near vital trade routes, Caravans Castle, formerly known as Montreal, became Raynald's base of operations. From here, he launched relentless attacks on Muslim caravans traveling between Damascus and Egypt, amassing wealth and supplies for the Crusader kingdom. Raynald's audacity knew no bounds as he ventured as far as the Hejaz, the holiest region in Islam, to target Muslim pilgrims on their way to Mecca. In one daring raid, he plundered the well of Zamzam, considered sacred by Muslims, an act that deeply offended Islamic sensibilities and further aggravated relations with the Muslim rulers. Meanwhile, Saladin consolidated his forces and prepared to confront the Crusader threat. With the addition of Nur al-Din's territories, Saladin assembled a formidable army, laying siege to the Crusader stronghold in 1189. As the siege dragged on, the situation for the Crusaders grew increasingly dire. Realizing the gravity of their circumstances, messengers were sent to negotiate a truce with Saladin. However, one messenger returned with an unsettling report. He claimed that Saladin had expressed his willingness to grant the release of some prisoners only after extracting heavy ransoms, but had shown no interest in ending the siege. With hopes for a peaceful resolution dashed, the Crusaders prepared to fight to the death. However, news of the impending doom reached Raynald, who wasted no time in putting his plan into action. Gathering his knights, he set out on a mission to relieve the siege of Acre, but upon arriving at the siege, he found that the Crusader reinforcements had already been routed by Saladin's forces. Forced to retreat, Raynald and his men fled to Caravans, desperately hoping to reinforce its defenses. Upon hearing of Raynald's failed relief attempt, Baldwin VI, Guy of Lusignan, and Amalric of Jerusalem gathered their knights and rode to meet up with Raynald at Caravans. Upon reaching the castle, they learned that the Muslim forces had retreated after failing to breach the castle walls. However, unbeknownst to them, Saladin's move was nothing more than a ruse. While his main force was engaged elsewhere, a detachment of Muslim soldiers was secretly advancing on Caravans. As the Crusaders rested at the castle, believing themselves to be safe, Saladin's men launched a surprise attack. The Crusaders were caught off guard and suffered heavy casualties. Among them was Baldwin VI, who was taken captive. While the other nobles managed to escape, Raynald was captured and brought before Saladin. In the aftermath of the battle, Saladin offered Raynald a choice, either to convert to Islam and live or to remain a Christian and face execution. Raynald, unwilling to renounce his faith, was executed by Saladin. Some accounts suggest that he was beheaded, while others mention that he was burned alive, an account corroborated by a letter from Abbot Samson of Bury St. Edmunds. After capturing Caravans Castle, Saladin went on to conquer the rest of the Crusader kingdom. However, he is said to have spared the life of Guy of Lusignan, the king of Jerusalem, in accordance with the terms of their agreement. Following the fall of Jerusalem, Saladin treated the city's Christian inhabitants with respect, granting them safe passage to Acre in exchange for the release of Muslim prisoners. This magnanimous gesture showcased Saladin's nobility and commitment to fairness, even towards his defeated enemies. Although Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven draws inspiration from actual historical events, it is important to recognize that it primarily serves as a piece of historical fiction. The film takes creative liberties to construct a narrative that revolves around the personal conflict between Raynald and Saladin, depicting Raynald as an uncompromising fanatic solely driven by religious zeal and Saladin as a noble and tolerant leader. While this portrayal helps to drive the film's plot, it oversimplifies the complexities of the Crusades and the motivations of those involved. One of the notable inaccuracies in the film is the character of Saladin, who is portrayed as a largely peaceful ruler open to coexistence with the Crusaders. In reality, Saladin was a skilled military strategist and leader who employed both diplomacy and force to achieve his goals. His actions, including the siege of Jerusalem, demonstrate his commitment to reuniting Muslim territories under his banner and restoring Islamic dominance in the region. Similarly, the film's portrayal of Raynald as an unrepentant and bloodthirsty warmonger overlooks the historical context of his actions. Raynald's decision to attack Muslim caravans and holy sites was driven by a combination of factors, including personal ambition, the desire for wealth and resources, and the prevailing attitudes of the time towards Muslims. His actions, while extreme, were not without precedent in the Crusader kingdoms. Moreover, the film simplifies the broader context of the Crusades, reducing the conflict between Raynald and Saladin to a personal vendetta. In reality, the Crusades were a complex series of religious and political campaigns that involved multiple participants, including various European kingdoms, Muslim states, and local populations. The conflict was not simply a clash between good and evil, but a struggle for power, resources, and religious dominance. While Kingdom of Heaven offers a compelling narrative and visually stunning depiction of medieval warfare, it is essential for viewers to be aware of its historical inaccuracies and the film's tendency to simplify complex historical events and figures. By understanding the historical context and motivations of the characters, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of the Crusades and the legacy of figures like Saladin and Raynald. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to know more about Saladin, stay tuned for more updates.